People often misunderstand Lent as simply a time for giving up things, but that's not an adequate definition of it. First of all, it's not even a standalone season. When in the 4th century Lent was apparently first adopted by Christian churches throughout the ancient world, it was always placed right up to the celebration of the death and resurrection of Jesus at Easter. It led up to that. It was an extended preparation for that, particularly for those who were going to be baptized at Easter, but also for ordinary Christians who were joining them on their journey of faith, on a pilgrimage, one might say. For a pilgrimage always leads to a definite spiritual goal, to arrive at a holy place. So Lent is not an imitation of the people of Israel wandering around, lost in the wilderness for 40 years, not knowing where they were going. Lent is a period of intense preparation for a definite point to which we are all headed. Viewing it as a pilgrimage is interesting because one of the earliest descriptions we have of the new season of Lent comes in an account of a pilgrimage that was made by a woman named Egeria from somewhere in Western Europe to Jerusalem and the biblical lands in the late 4th century. It's possibly the first or second account to be written by a woman. She spent 3 years in Jerusalem, noting down in detail the liturgical life of the city, and so leaving us with a very precious source of information. With regard to Lent, she says, calling it the 40, the custom of fasting here in the 40 is such that some, when they have eaten on the Lord's day after the dismissal, that is, at the 5th or 6th hour, do not eat again for the whole week until the following Saturday. If there are any who cannot do complete weeks of fasting, as we said above, throughout Lent they dine in the middle, on the 5th day. But if anyone cannot do that, they do a 2-day fast throughout the 40, and any who cannot do even this eat every evening. No one compels how much anyone ought to do, but everyone does what they are able. Those who have done much are not praised, nor are those who have done less reproached, for such is the custom here. In other words, it's not the amount that a person does that matters. It's not about achieving a personal best. It's not even about keeping a precise rule. It's sharing together in a corporate activity of the church to the extent that each person can manage. Thus, Lent there involved disciplining one's appetites, but also taking part in common prayer more, or rather more often. The number of daily services increased, and there was a shared vigil throughout the night every Friday. On top of this, those who were preparing for baptism attended a class with the bishop every weekday, and so did their godparents, and so also did many other ordinary Christians. Indeed, our author claims this is why they are able to better understand the readings in church. She says, and so it is that in these places all the faithful follow the scriptures when they are read in church, because they are all taught during these 40 days. That is, from the 1st hour to the 3rd hour, because catechesis is done for 3 hours. God knows, lady sisters, that the voices of the faithful who come to listen to the catechesis are louder at those things that are said or explained by the bishop then than when these things are explained in this way when he sits and preaches in church. I'm sure you'll be relieved to know that I'm not proposing that you should go to the extreme lengths of fasting that they did in ancient Jerusalem, nor as much praying or of studying Christianity for 3 hours a day. But I am suggesting that there are things here that we can learn for our own Lenten practice. Take the matter of liturgy and time. We have all become time lords. We are now able to control when we choose to do things. We can, if we wish, shop in the middle of the night, watch a TV show or movie whenever it suits us and not when the schedule dictates. And we can even stream a church service long after it has actually taken place. Being able to participate in worship in this way is a wonderful boon for those who are prevented from joining it in at the regular time. But it carries the potential seeds of destruction, not only of the concept that liturgy is integrally connected to time, but of liturgy itself. Just as eating Monday night supper on Tuesday evening makes it instead into Tuesday's supper and not Monday's anymore, so too does saying evening prayer the next morning turn it into morning prayer. In the same way that recording the Sunday Eucharist on the previous Wednesday or streaming it on the following Thursday means that one is not really participating together in Sunday worship at all. Now, the Christian Church has always made provision for individuals to be able to share in some way later if they're unable to be present with the rest of the congregation at the due time. So that's not a problem. But if there is no due time at all, if we all pray and worship whenever we choose and not when others are doing it, then real liturgy begins to be destroyed. Liturgy is something we do with the church. Physically together with other Christians when we can be, and at least more or less at the same time when we can't. And Lent is a season in which we all share together. Not everyone doing the same amount of fasting, the same amount of praying, the same amount of learning. It's not about quantity, it's about participating with others in activities to the extent that we can. So even if I am unable to pray, prayer has still been offered by the church. I don't need to make it up later as though it were a free-flowing unit, like the repayment of a debt, which is best if it's paid on time, but if that's missed, then it still remains for me to do it at some other time. Mind you, the church has not always thought in this way. Clergy in the Middle Ages were required to pray 7 times each day. But in practice, they would try to fit them in whenever they could manage. For example, grouping 4 times together in the morning and the other 3 together in the evening. Generally doing it on their own because it was too difficult to coordinate getting together with others at a particular time. Sometimes they would get behind and have to postpone praying altogether for another day or even longer. Sometimes they would get so far behind that they needed to catch up, and this was the case with Martin Luther, the 16th century reformer. He says, "When I was a monk, I was unwilling to omit any of the prayers. But when I was busy with public lecturing and writing, I often accumulated my appointed prayers for a whole week or even 2 or 3 weeks. Then I would take a Saturday off or shut myself in for as long as 3 days without food or drink until I had said the prescribed prayers. This made my head split, and as a consequence, I couldn't close my eyes for 5 nights, lay sick unto death, and went out of my senses. You can easily see why he thought having a reformation was preferable to that. The temptation for those like me who are over-conscientious is to imagine that everything depends on us, whether it's keeping up with liturgical services, fasting, or other deprivations. Whereas if this last year has taught us anything, it should be how much we need other people to share with us. We can't go it alone. Lent does not ask from us feats of individual heroism, but just to join the church to the extent that we are able to, on a journey together, on a pilgrimage in which we grow in grace, as we discipline our appetites, spend more time in conscious prayer and in study, as we learn to carry our cross and prepare to share with our Lord symbolically and sacramentally in his death and resurrection.